Hi there, it's me, Freshie. If you've seen a few of my other videos, you probably noticed that I kind of like Halo. I've made a video ranking Halo's multiplayer from worst to best, so I figure I should do the same with Halo's campaigns. For me, the campaign of a Halo game is more important than the multiplayer. That's not to say the multiplayer isn't important, but the narrative of the series, as well as the art style, is what turned me into a Halo fan. I'm going to be ranking each installment based on the story, level design, and gameplay, and maybe a couple of other things too. You probably won't agree with this list in its entirety, but hopefully I explain myself well enough so that it makes sense. Also, I'm only including the FPS Halo games, so Halo Wars 1 and 2 are off the list. Now that I have that out of the way, I'll get on with the list, starting with the worst campaign, Halo 5. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Halo 5 easily is the worst story in the series, and it's not even close. There's a lot to complain about, but I may as well start with my biggest gripe, Cortana. Cortana was a great character in the original trilogy. She was smart, witty, and a great deuteragonist. In Halo 5, not only does she not act like herself, but 343 turned her into the villain for basically no reason. Cortana being the villain makes no sense for her character. It undermines everything the heroes accomplished in the original trilogy, and it's a slap in the face to anyone who started with those games. The other characters aren't much better. Why are the rest of Osiris and Blue Team even here? They have no narrative relevance, and only Locke and Chief are important. Everyone in this game is a cardboard cutout and lacks personality. Even Buck, Lasky, and Arbiter are boring. Speaking of boring, let's talk about the gameplay. The gameplay isn't terrible here, but it's not good either. It feels a lot like Call of Duty. The enemy behavior is rather boring, with the exception of the hunters. The level design is nothing special for the most part. Sanghelios was kinda cool, but the braking is the worst level in the entire franchise. Yes, worse than the library. It's a straight line from beginning to end, and the combat feels even more like Call of Duty. I could also talk about stuff like the uninteresting plot, reliance on external media, bad choreography, and false marketing, but I'd rather just move on to the next game on the list, Halo 4. I wouldn't say Halo 4's campaign is bad, but it was definitely the weakest at the time of its release. A lot of Halo lore was retconned between Bungie's games and 343's games, and Halo 4 demonstrates it. Not only is the art style different, but Forerunners were retconned into being a species existing alongside ancient humanity rather than being ancient humans themselves. This flies in the face of the whole purpose of the Human Covenant War. The Didact is an okay villain, but I find it funny that he doesn't kill Chief when he has the perfect opportunity to. What's funny is that the terminals for this game are more interesting than the game itself. I don't like that the lore in said terminals contradicts established lore from the Bungie games, but they're still interesting nonetheless. The Didact and the Librarian feel more fleshed out here. The subplot between Chief and Cortana was subpar in my opinion. First off, Rampancy has been retconned from being an AI's path to sentience to being about an AI going crazy, which I don't like. It also feels a bit too on the nose at times. Cortana isn't the same witty and analytical companion she was in the original trilogy, and her relationship with Chief is too romantic here. I do think the two care about each other, but less in a romantic way and more in a brothers-in-arms way. Gameplay-wise, Halo 4 is alright, although I have two complaints. First off, the ammo for your guns is pitiful on Heroic and Legendary. Every encounter uses up all your ammo for at least one of your weapons. Second, the levels are too linear. I know Halo has always had linear levels, with a few exceptions here and there, but those levels were more open and allowed you to take different paths into an encounter. Halo 4 does have redeeming qualities though. The soundtrack is pretty good, Lasky is a great character, and the game looks amazing for a 360 title. As much as I bash this game's story, I think it would have been a decent non-Halo game. And I'm a bit disappointed that Halo 5 went in a completely different narrative direction from 4. Anyway, up next is Halo Infinite. Halo Infinite is definitely 343's best Halo campaign. The soundtrack, combat loop, and art style all feel like old school Halo, and I love that. I think the brutes here are actually the best they've ever been in the series. both visually and in gameplay. They're a decent challenge, unlike in Halo 3 and Reach. 343 really nailed the combat loop of Infinite. The Banished, the Sentinels, and the Endless are all fun to fight. Controversially, I think the Skimmers are more fun to fight than the drones. I do have a few complaints though. I think the bosses should have been more organic, kind of like the Brute Chieftains in Halo 3. The open world aspect is decent on paper, but there is barely any variety in the environments. No deserts, no snowy areas, no beaches, only grasslands with mountains. The story of Halo is in a weird place right now because 343 dropped the whole created plotline in favor of the Banished and the Endless. Don't get me wrong, I think the Banished and the Endless are much more interesting threats than all the other enemy factions in Halo 4 and 5, but resolving a conflict off-screen is very unsatisfying. And yeah, the books probably address this, but Halo is a game series, so I expect conflicts from the games to be resolved in the games. Halo Infinite's story is pretty mediocre to me. Chief is really well written here, and the Weapon and Esparza are great characters, but the story itself feels very uneventful. One thing I don't like is that Eshram and all the other main villains don't really do anything to advance the plot. All they really do is capture Esparza. Well, that was all the 343 games. On to the Bungie games, starting with ODST. I wish we had more spin-offs like ODST. It's a neat little expansion that tells a different kind of story from the typical Saving the Galaxy storyline. The only other FPS Halo that sort of fits this description is Reach, but I digress. The game's narrative, while not great, is serviceable. I think its characters really carry the story. The banter between them is entertaining, and Buck is one of my favorite characters in the series. ODST's campaign is pretty good, and I think that's largely because of the incredible atmosphere and soundtrack. Mombasa Streets really feels like the aftermath of an alien invasion, and the flashback levels help the pacing. The levels are also well designed. I quite like Mombasa Streets and Data Hive for how calm they are. This is also the first time we see the engineers in the games. They made a few appearances in the books before this, but now we actually get to interact with them. There are two gripes I have though. The first, and more minor complaint, is that there are no elites to fight. I know that the Prophet of Truth has already planned the Great Schism by this point, but it hasn't been enacted yet. Even if Truth's fleet doesn't have elites, Regret's fleet certainly did, and I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that some of Regret's troops were left behind. And yeah, I know the game sort of addresses this in the Mission Tayari Plaza, but I think elites could have been fun to fight in Halo 3's engine, and ODST would have been a perfect opportunity for it. My second gripe is that I don't really feel like an ODST. I feel like a diet Spartan. Sure, you have less health and you take fall damage, but apart from that, you can pretty much do anything a Spartan can, like destroying vehicles with your bare hands and wiping out squads of Covenant by yourself. I know that ODSTs are elite soldiers, but I think making the battles smaller in scale, incentivizing stealth, and removing certain abilities like assassinations and hip-fire accuracy would have made ODST's gameplay more distinct. Still, Halo 3 ODST has a lot going for it, particularly its atmosphere. It's a great game, but I think it's beaten out by the other Bungie games, like Halo Reach. Yep, that's right, Reach is next. Reach is interesting to me because I feel like it does a lot right, but there are a few things holding it back. I'll start with what I like. The enemy AI is at its best here, and it makes for an excellent combat loop. The elites are actually pretty scary in this game because of how aggressive and fast they are. The only enemies that aren't well designed are the brutes, who probably shouldn't be in this game to begin with, but everything else is pretty intelligent. Another thing I like about Reach is the tragic atmosphere and tone. I really like how the situation on Reach feels more and more desperate the further into the game you are. The soundtrack and destruction around you really make you feel like you're fighting an unwinnable battle. The levels in this game aren't that special in my opinion. They're decent and they serve their purpose well enough, but I don't really get the itch to play most of these levels. As for the story, I love it for the most part. It's a great story about the brutality of war and the harsh reality of the Human Covenant War. There are several moments of hopelessness, death, destruction, and defeat that I really like, particularly in the second half of the game. That being said, it does take a bit of time to get going, and Noble Team isn't that interesting to me. They're good characters, I just think they could have been expanded a bit more. Another problem I have with the story is that it retcons quite a bit of the Fall of Reach. Yes, I am the kind of guy who cares about consistency within the canon. To be fair, I probably wouldn't be complaining about this if I preferred the game's story over the books, but I honestly think the book is a better story. The actual Fall of Reach was more unexpected and shorter in the book, and I prefer that. It makes the fall of the planet more devastating. I may discuss this more in a future video, so if that sounds interesting, let me know. Again, Reach's story is decent, I just think that the Fall of Reach was better. Anyway, I'm moving on to the next game on the list, which is Halo 3. I may get some heat for what I'm about to say regarding Halo 3, but it's my honest opinion. I will discuss my issues in further detail in a future video, but I'll keep it short and sweet here. That's not to say I don't like Halo 3's campaign, I do. I just don't think it's as good as CE or 2. Something Halo 3 absolutely does right are the set pieces, like the Scarab battles and the Warthog mode. The vehicle combat is at its best here, and I think it's a big reason why many consider this the best campaign. Well, that and 4-player co-op. The brutes in Halo 3 aren't bad or anything, but I think they could have been improved in their design and intelligence. They're still pretty fun though. Halo 3's second half also has some of the best levels in the series. The Ark and the Covenant are fantastic, and Halo is in my top 3 favorite Halo missions. I actually think Cortana is a decent mission too, because the Flood are fun to fight here, unlike in Halo 2. The Pure Forms are also a great way to spice up Flood gameplay. The first half of the game, however, is pretty mediocre in my opinion. The locations aren't particularly interesting, and not much happens up until the end of the storm, which brings me to my next point, the story. My biggest complaint about the story is that the elites should have been in the game more. While the elites do help the UNSC quite a bit in this game, I feel like fighting alongside them more often would have been a great payoff to what was set up in Halo 2. With them teaming up with humanity. I do have other complaints about the story, like the Arbiter's reduced presence and Miranda's death, but again, I'll go over these complaints more in a future video. Alright, I've been pretty negative, but I really do like Halo 3, and a big reason for that is its presentation. Despite Halo 3's shortcomings, its presentation is top-notch, and I love its atmosphere, tone, soundtrack, and visuals, which still look great in 2024. I honestly don't think this game needs a remaster, it's just gorgeous. Another really cool feature in Halo 3's campaign is the terminals. You actually get a glimpse of the Forerunner Flood War in a way that's not universe-breaking. You get to learn about Mendicant Bias's betrayal of the Forerunners as well as the war on a grand scale. The game's ending is satisfying, and the final level is a great way to end the trilogy. It was difficult deciding whether Halo 3 or Reach deserved to be higher on this list, but I ultimately chose 3 because of its levels and atmosphere. That's all I have to say about Halo 3, so I'll move on to my number 2 choice, Halo 2. The reason Halo 2 is so high on this list is because it easily has the best story in the series. I personally loved the direction it went in. Halo 2 expanded on the UNSC, the Forerunners, and the Flood, but I think the addition of the Covenant's perspective through the Arbiter is what really makes the Halo universe that much more alive and believable. We actually get to see what the Covenant believe in and how their society operates this time around. I'm really glad Bungie took this approach because it gives us a broader understanding of the Human Covenant War. The Arbiter is a great character, arguably the best in the franchise. Watching an esteemed Covenant Supreme Commander fall from grace and eventually come to terms with his religion, betraying him and lying to him is as satisfying as it is compelling. And all of this happens because of Installation 04's destruction. The fact that we basically get to play as the previous game's antagonist is a pretty cool twist. The other characters are cool too, they all have motivations and personalities. Johnson is a great comic relief character and is also a badass. The Spec Ops commander is fairly nuanced and learns to trust the Arbiter. In truth, Tartarus and the Gravemind are excellent villains, just to name a few. And let's not forget about the banger soundtrack, which is arguably the best of any Halo game. The combat in this game is pretty satisfying. Mowing down Flood with an energy sword never gets old. I actually like fighting the brutes in Halo 2, not only because they fight differently from the elites, but because they're tough opponents, unlike in Halo Reach and Halo 3. Halo 2 is also infamous for having a brutal legendary experience. Seriously, it's by far the hardest. I think the challenge can be pretty fun, but it's a bit overkill in my opinion. The rest of the Bungie games honestly did a better job at balancing difficulty. Still, I love Halo 2's campaign, but there is one campaign I love more, and that campaign is Halo Combat Evolved. I love Halo 1's campaign so much it's unreal. It's definitely the campaign I play the most often, and that's for several reasons. Let's start with the atmosphere. There's so much mystery around the Ring, the Forerunners, the Flood, and even the Covenant, and the game reveals new information at the right moments to keep you engaged. The Covenant aren't that fleshed out here, but I think it works in this instance because it makes them feel enigmatic and fits with the tone. There's a sense of wonder whether you're coming across a Forerunner structure, raiding a Covenant ship, or even just looking up at the sky with the Ring arcing over you. I also love Halo 1's art style because of how simple and somewhat stylized it is. Not only that, I like how colorful this game is, as opposed to future entries. The story is very simple, but that's not a bad thing, far from it. It's a hero's journey with a great cast of characters, high stakes, and a few great twists. At the beginning of the game, humanity is backed into a corner. They just lost their biggest military stronghold, and they don't know what to expect with this mysterious ring. Halo is a story about discovery, adventure, and beating the odds, and that's why I love it so much. Halo CE is a self-contained story, but it also sets up an amazing universe ripe for exploration. The reveal of the Flood is excellently handled, and they feel truly terrifying in CE. They're scary in the other two games in the trilogy as well, but in CE they're amoral and feel truly alien. But enough about the story, let's talk gameplay. Halo 1's campaign has the best gameplay loop in my opinion. The enemies are fun to fight with their own strengths and weaknesses. The Covenant and Sentinels are more tactical, while the Flood try to overwhelm you. The only enemy type that's underwhelming to me is the Hunter, which dies by a single pistol shot. Otherwise, they're a decent enemy. I love the multi-faction fights in the game's second half. It makes the combat feel more dynamic. The weapons are fun to use as well. Getting a headshot in this game feels more satisfying than in other Halos for me, probably because of the low bullet magnetism. The vehicle combat, while fun, is a bit underused here. I think levels like Halo and the Silent Cartographer would have been even cooler if they had ghosts. Speaking of levels, CE's missions are phenomenal, with one glaring exception. You all know the one. But everything else is great. Their aesthetic is top-notch, they're fairly open, and they offer distinct experiences from one another. Also, Keys is a fantastic mission, and I will die on that hill. It shows how horrifying the Flood really is by having them overwhelm the Covenant on their own ship, as well as showing us Keys succumbing to the Flood in a disturbing way. The levels can be a bit repetitive, but this aspect of the game doesn't bother me that much. It's really only a problem in the library for me. I also don't really mind revisiting multiple locations, seeing as there's a narrative reason for it. Well, that's my Halo campaign ranking. I'm expecting quite a bit of disagreement, especially regarding Halo 3, but hopefully I explained myself well enough so that you can at least understand my reasoning. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, consider subscribing. Anyway, this is Freshy Samuel, signing off.